She's just logistics, my father said into a microphone, in front of 100 people. The real soldier is Arya. That was the moment. The kind that doesn't sting. It burns into your name, your rank, your spine. I'm Cassiopeia Trent. U.S. Army. 20 years in uniform. 2 combat tours. Bronze Star. And yet, in a small-town wedding hall, I became invisible, replaced by a woman who had never seen a battlefield, but shared my father's last name. I didn't flinch, didn't speak. I set my drink down and walked out, not to escape, but to decide. Because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his new daughter, Arya, had just been assigned to my command, and this time I wasn't going to stay silent. I can't remember the last time I called him Dad. Maybe it was the day I stood at his doorstep at 17, enlistment form still damp with fresh ink. He looked at me like I'd handed him a funeral notice instead of a future. You're joining the army? Logistics? Any man worth his name would be ashamed to call you his daughter. 15 years passed. I didn't come back for him. I came for Aunt Lydia, my mother's sister, the one who kept sending me Christmas cards every year, even when I never wrote back. The wedding was held at a budget banquet room just off Route 66 in Flagstaff, Arizona. The kind of place with folding chairs, sagging tablecloths, and centerpieces that smelled like synthetic roses. My father, retired sheriff of Coconino County, stood at the center like a politician back on the campaign trail. There were no violins, no champagne, just Bud Light in coolers, a Costco cake sweating under fluorescence, and a microphone that whined every time someone breathed near it. I stood in the back, navy dress plain as drywall, a glass of lukewarm water in my hand. No one knew who I was, and I preferred it that way, until he raised his glass. I have 2 daughters, he said, voice thick with pride and bourbon. One just graduated from West Point. The other? She works logistics. Never did understand what honor really means. It didn't hit me like a punch. It hit like silence, like the kind that swells before someone slams a door. No one laughed. Forks stopped mid-scrape. A few heads turned, half curious, half embarrassed. I didn't flinch, didn't speak. I set my glass on the nearest table and turned to the young waiter who looked like he wanted to crawl under the buffet line. Got any ice water? This one's gone warm. Then I walked out. The parking lot was quiet, just the buzz of old sodium lights and the distant thump of someone's car stereo. I popped the trunk of my car. Inside, still in its garment bag, hung my full dress uniform, the one with the bronze star pinned above the nameplate, the one that made cadets stand straighter when I entered a room. I ran my hand over the zipper, then shut the trunk. Not yet. Not like this. I was raised in a house with 2 rules. 1, daughters stay quiet. 2, real men, especially cops, don't cry. I broke both. Mom died when I was 14. After that, my father, Harold Trent, became judge, jury, and executioner. When I told him I wanted to enlist, he slammed the papers down on the kitchen table like I'd confessed to something criminal. You want to be what? Some gun cleaner for frontline grunts? I left that day. I never stepped foot in that house again. Years passed. I rose through the ranks. I was stationed in D.C. at the time, holding a lieutenant colonel slot, buried in readiness reports and review boards. Then, one afternoon, a plain envelope arrived on my desk. No email, no call, just a handwritten letter, postmarked from Arizona. Cass, if you remember who your father is, I hope you'll read this. I've got another daughter now, Arya. She wants to apply to West Point. I know you have connections. I know you can help. Being a father, I finally get what it means to be scared of your kid falling short. I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I just folded the letter in half, slid it into the back of a drawer, and pulled up her file. One discrepancy, one red flag in her physical readiness test, a failed 2-mile time, 1 minute off standard. I overwrote it. I didn't rewrite the record. I didn't lie. But I scrubbed the note from the comment section, The way you erase a fingerprint without leaving the glass empty. I never told him. And I never told her. Just once. I told myself. Just this once. The Monday after the wedding. I returned to Fort Leonard Wood. The air still felt heavy from what had happened in that dim banquet hall, but I shook it off. There were cadets to train, officers to evaluate, and a program to run. New rotation. Fresh batch of second lieutenants arriving for the logistics officer track. My aide handed me the printed roster over morning coffee. My eyes moved line by line, until they stopped. Cold. 2LT Aria Mayfield. Assigned Logistics Officer Cadre. I froze. Her name. Her assignment. Her chain of command. Under me. I walked back to my office, shut the door, pulled her personnel file from the internal system and printed it. Spread it across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. Photo ID, her hair tied too tight, smile not quite reaching her eyes. Summary. Recent West Point graduate. Academic performance, above average. Recommendation note. Candidate supported by legacy letter. Recommended with caution. There it was. The trace of that letter, the one I'd never replied to. The one signed in my father's uneven handwriting, with the plea, if you still believe in family at all, help her. She didn't know I had. She didn't know I existed in her story. And now, she was walking straight into mine, without a clue. I didn't feel anger, not yet. Just a quiet tightening in my chest. The kind you get right before a storm rolls in. The kind that says, you opened the door, and now you have to decide what you're letting in. I'd seen plenty of new officers report in. Some with medals still too shiny, some too eager to prove they belonged, others hiding fear behind a square jaw and rehearsed salutes. But that morning, when Aria Mayfield walked into my office and stood at attention, I felt a tug just behind my ribs. Not anger, not pride. Something quieter, something that hummed like fatigue pressed against old scar tissue. Second Lieutenant Aria Mayfield, reporting on time, ma'am. I nodded. I didn't tell her my name was Cassiopeia Trent. I didn't tell her I was the one who'd signed off on her West Point file. And I sure as hell didn't tell her I was her half-sister, the woman her father had once dismissed as a girl with a wrench and a uniform. She didn't know. And maybe she wouldn't have cared if she had. Over the next week, I watched her from a distance, observed the way she spoke, walked, commanded space. She was confident, smooth in conversation, a little too polished for someone who hadn't earned her boots yet. But what caught my ear wasn't how she spoke to others. It was how often she spoke about herself. My dad was sheriff for 20 years. Rules were our bedtime stories. I heard the colonel here mostly runs paperwork, doesn't get her hands dirty, old school type. People listened, nodded. No one questioned her version of things. But I knew better. I kept my mouth shut, because when you hold rank, silence can speak louder than pride. Still, every time my name passed through her lips like a rumor, I felt something tighten behind my ribs again, not because I needed her to know who I was, but because she didn't think it mattered. That night, long after the barracks lights went dark, I logged into the personnel system and pulled her original West Point application. I hadn't touched it in years, but I remembered the section, physical aptitude test, 2-mile run, recorded just under 16 minutes, 1 minute off the required threshold. Back then, I'd called it a rounding error, a minor adjustment, a one-time correction for someone who still had time to learn. Just once. I told myself, just this once. The current report was already waiting in my inbox. Aria had passed the same 2-mile run last week, 15 minutes, 34 seconds, just enough to slide under the bar. But the field note from the drill sergeant raised a familiar flag. 1 lap strong, then a sudden gap in visibility, and a final sprint to the line. It was subtle, almost nothing. The kind of thing that gets overlooked when someone wants to see promise. I didn't sign off. I printed it, slipped it into a manila folder with her name on it, marked it with a red tab, let it sit in the bottom drawer of my desk. The next day, in the officer's mess, I heard her before I saw her. Colonel Trent? She's got a good handle on SOPs. I guess. One of those checklist commanders. Probably never had to push past protocol. Another voice chimed in. Didn't she serve in Afghanistan? She says she did, Arya replied, her voice light, almost teasing. But honestly, a lot of things look good on paper. The room didn't go silent. It kept moving, buzzing, chewing. But my feet carried me through the door just as naturally as my hand found a cup by the coffee urn. I poured. I turned. She looked up and saw me. Her shoulders stiffened. Her jaw froze halfway through a sip of water. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just looked at her. She dropped her eyes first. I took a sip, walked over, and stood directly across from her. I used to be you, I said. Ambitious, loud, smart enough to think I knew everything. But I never looked down on someone before I understood what they carried. I didn't wait for her to reply. I walked out with my coffee still steaming in my hand. She hadn't said my name yet, but I knew it was coming. Not because she would recognize it, but because soon she'd have no choice. Some truths don't need to be told. They find their own way out, like sunlight slipping through cracked blinds. That week, a long classified mission report was finally cleared for public recognition. The Helmand extraction, a rescue op I'd led years ago in southern Afghanistan, was declassified and picked up by the Internal Military Bulletin. A grainy photo showed me in combat gear, dust on my face, helmet tilted back, eyes sharp. The caption read, Cole, Cassiopeia Trent, Operation Lead, Helmand extraction, 94% recovery rate. I hadn't talked about it, never saw the point. After all, what do medals do, except gather dust when the room's empty? But now it was out there, on inboxes, bulletin boards, rec room TVs. Not because I wanted it, because the truth has a rhythm of its own. The ceremony was held Thursday morning on the parade field at Fort Leonard Wood. I put on my dress blues for the first time in years, not to prove anything, but to confirm everything. Arya was seated in the front row with the new officers. I caught a glimpse of her laughing quietly with someone beside her. She didn't know. But when the announcer called my name and I stepped up to the podium, the change hit her like a winter wind. She didn't stand. She froze. The chatter died. Rose stiffened. Even the wind paused. I didn't look at her, but I heard it, caught between breath and disbelief. Oh my God, that's my general. That's my sister. I stood at the mic and scanned the sea of uniforms. I didn't speak for long. There's not much I need to say. 20 years in this uniform taught me one thing. Honor isn't applause. It's how you move when no one's clapping. I stepped back, saluted, and let the silence speak the rest. Chinochrisals. That afternoon, I called Arya into my office. She came in slowly. Not the same girl who used to toss her hair and smile like she owned the room. Her shoulders were lower, eyes rimmed in red. She didn't sit until I gestured. I placed her file on the desk. Didn't open it. Didn't raise my voice. Lieutenant Mayfield, are you aware your physical training records have been flagged? She nodded. Barely. I pushed the folder toward her. I thought giving you a chance meant helping you, but maybe it just delayed the lesson. Her head dropped. For the first time, her voice was almost small. I didn't know you were... Dad never told me. He said you were an admin. He never once called you a colonel. I swear. I believed her. He'd written me a letter once, begging me to help get her into West Point, but he'd never told her I answered. Never gave her the name of the person who carried her through the gate. Her eyes filled, but she didn't break down. She just asked, soft and trembling, "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "But I won't coddle you. I'll train you like everyone else. If you rise, it'll be because you earned it, not because I held the ladder." I stood and walked toward the door. 0500, Training Field B2. Bring your running shoes. She stood, steadier than I expected, and for the first time, she raised her hand in a proper salute, sharp, respectful, and just a little shaky. Yes, ma'am. October skies in Missouri cut like glass against the skin. At 05:02, the training field at B2 glowed under cold floodlights. The pavement was still wet from overnight dew, and the wind sliced through the flagpoles with military precision. I stood beside Sergeant Givens, clipboard in his left hand, coffee in his right, voice rough and uncompromising. 2 miles, time standard, 15 minutes, 36 seconds. Anyone over fails. No exceptions. Arya stood at the starting line. No makeup, hair tied high, boots worn, mud caked from drills the day before. She didn't look at me, but I knew she felt my presence. It hung in the space between us, heavy but earned. The whistle blew. She ran. I didn't cheer, didn't nod, just watched. Her pace on the first lap was solid, focused. The second lap, I saw her stumble, a brief hitch in her left knee, but she pushed through. No shortcuts this time, no breaks behind buildings, just grit and gravel. At 15:18, she crossed the line, legs giving out beneath her. She collapsed onto the damp field, hands fisted in the grass, lungs dragging in October air like it might be her last. Givens glanced at his watch, then at me. 15:18, passed. I didn't walk to her. I didn't offer a hand. You get up on your own, I said calmly. Nobody carries you here. She pushed herself up. It wasn't graceful, but it was solid. Her eyes met mine, no defiance, no fear, just something new. Starting today, I told her, you're not someone's daughter. You're a soldier, and a soldier doesn't wear someone else's medals. She nodded, swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. I turned and walked away. Not out of coldness, but because the moment didn't belong to me anymore. What I felt wasn't forgiveness. It was permission, granted, not given. A door cracked open, just wide enough for her to step through. The sun was low over Fort Leonard Wood, casting long, amber shadows across the concrete. As I stepped out of the office that evening, I saw him standing just below the stoop, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders pulled in against the wind. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just waited. I kept walking until I was 2 steps from passing him. Then I stopped. Cass, he said. I didn't respond. I waited. They called you Colonel, he continued, voice dry and thin. On the news. The bulletin board outside the rec center. I still said nothing. He shifted, swallowed hard. At the wedding. I didn't know how to say it right. I never did. I raised a hand. Not in anger. Not to shut him down, but to draw a clean line. I don't need you to apologize, I said, my tone steady. I just need you to stop lying about who I am. He blinked. Nodded once. His eyes never left mine. I turned to leave, but halfway down the path. I glanced back. He stood at attention, heels together. Then he lifted his hand and saluted. Sharp, deliberate, regulation perfect. He wasn't saluting a stranger, not a disappointment, not Cass. He was saluting Colonel Cassiopeia Trent, for the first time, and for me, that was enough. 2 weeks later, the morning was cold and clean. I stood near the edge of the parade field, coffee in hand, watching the new platoon move through their drills. Breath puffed in white clouds, boots pounded against frost-bitten dirt. At the front of the formation, Arya ran steady, shoulders square, cadence tight. Her combat boots were newer than most, still holding their factory white in the creases, but they were no longer clean. Mud clung to the soles. Her shirt clung to her back. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. A young sergeant stepped beside me, squinting toward the front of the pack. Ma'am, he asked, is she related to you? I took a sip of coffee, let the question hang in the cold. No, I said calmly. She's a soldier. I turned toward my office, walking past the metal placard fixed to the door. Cole, Cassiopeia Trent, commanding officer. And I thought, not every battle needs to be won. Some just need to be seen. especially the ones someone else finally chooses to fight.